Yale University acknowledges that Indigenous people and nations, including Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Chigatecoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac and other Algonquin-speaking people have stewarded the land and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these people, these nations, and this land. Louis Kahn is widely recognized as one of the most influential architects of the 20th century. During his distinguished career, Kahn designed 3 museums: the addition to the Yale University Art Gallery in 1953, which was his first significant commission, the Kimbell Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas in 1972, and the Yale Center for British Art, his final building, which was completed after his death and opened to the public in 1977. His distinctive modernist style, as well as his singular architectural philosophy of how interior space is defined by the interplay of structure and light, continues to influence how architects approach museum design. This tonight is the first conversation in our new series, To Build for Art. Kahn was the inspiration to bring together 2 distinguished architects who also have noted relationships with structures that display art. Annabel Zeldorf is a German-born architect and principal of Zeldorf Architects, a 70-person design and architectural practice she founded in New York in 1988. She designs gallery spaces, museums, and homes for artists and collectors. Her approach to design has been described as restrained and exhibiting an elegance of structure. Her current projects include the redesign of the Sainsbury wing of the National Gallery in London and the expansion and renovation of the Frick Collection in New York. Previous projects include a renovation of the Sterling and Francine Clark Art Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts, the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego, and a new greenhouse and renovation of the historic greenhouse in Dumbarton Oaks in Washington, D.C. She is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and in 2014 was the recipient of its prestigious award in architecture. In 2016, she received the AIA New York Medal of Honor, and in 2021, she was recognized as a design leader by Architectural Records Women in Architecture Awards. Tonight, she'll be in discussion with Deborah Burke, Dean of the School of Architecture. You can see this is already going to be a good talk. In 2012, Burke was the inaugural recipient of the Berkeley Roop Prize at the University of California at Berkeley, which is given to an architect who has advanced the position of women in the profession and whose work emphasizes a commitment to sustainability and to community. She is the founder of the New York-based architecture firm Deborah Burke Partners. Among the firm's many achievements are significant projects such as the Marianne Boesky Gallery in New York, the Irwin Union Bank in Columbus, Indiana, the Yale School of Art, and Next Haven, a new arts model in New Haven. Today's program is presented through the generosity of the Terry F. Green 1969 Fund for British Art and Culture. I am pleased to welcome Annabelle and Deborah.
Thank you. Yeah. So no pictures, just conversation. And Annabelle and I did speak on the phone earlier this week. And as you probably could guess from the smiles and hand signals and chatter before, we are friends, fellow New Yorkers, fellow architects, colleagues, occasional competitors, but truly colleagues and friends. And one of the things we talked about, and that we trust will be tonight's conversation, which includes Courtney, is about the difference as well as the similarities between our work. Essentially, and you could tell from Courtney's introduction, Annabelle designs museums and galleries, and I design art schools and studios. That's a broad generalization, and there are we left out many things from both, but I would describe this, and this was part of our phone conversation, which was good fun, that Annabelle's rooms live in a kind of perpetual state of perfection, but have to be endlessly flexible and repairable and take the next new exhibition. And the rooms that we design in my office get really beat up. They enjoy the patina of use and abuse, but they also need to be able to take in, certainly in school projects, the next artist who then has the right to beat the room up however they see fit. And so those are differences in terms of our work, but we both feel strongly that we make spaces where people feel welcome to experience art and also to do their work, which is the making of art. I did look up 2 words, even though we all use them in common conversation. One is the word museum, which according to the dictionary that I found on my phone, a building in which objects of historical, scientific, artistic, or cultural interest are stored and exhibited. And then they had 4 little bullet points: collect, preserve, interpret, and display. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but anyway, that's what the phone said. And a studio, the second, third, and fourth definitions include things like small apartment, film production company, but the major definition is the workplace of a painter, sculptor, or photographer, or a place for the study of an art like dancing, singing, or acting. So I thought those words and what we think about those words and how we use them might be a good place for us to start, the museum and the studio.
I love that. I think as you were reading this, I can't remember exactly in which context, but I was talking with somebody who we're working with for an exhibition place, and the debate came up whether the word museum would be part of the title. And it was a group of people, and some people said, no, that's terribly old-fashioned. The word itself produces threshold anxiety, and we must never use this word. And so for a while I went along with it and thought, okay. And then all of a sudden I thought, hang on a minute. Why do we allow the judgment of things that matter so much? Why do we let these cloaks that are thrown over institutions that do something incredibly positive take over so much? Is there a way that we can think about this differently and not throw the baby out with the bathwater? I think so. How we show art, how we look at art, how we preserve art, exhibit it, I think is in constant flux and always has been, right? So it was one of the first questions you asked me is whether museum spaces have to be pristine. Well, I argued that there are so many kinds of museums and there are some really messy ones. So I don't think that that is a prerequisite.
I want to say something parenthetical. There are 3 museums at Yale, and the only one that's called the museum has a skeleton of a dinosaur in it. And the Yale Center for British Art and the Yale University Art Gallery, neither are actually called museums. But it's interesting to think about the word. Keep the word, I think, is probably a pretty good argument. But if we didn't, what word would we use?
Yeah, I mean, the Frick is called the Frick Collection. It's not called the museum.
So is it the small M museum that creates threshold problems, or the giant capital M, probably serif typeface, that causes threshold?
Well, it's the Beaux-Arts building that, has the giant doors and steps that go up. And and guards that tell you you can't bring your handbag. Certainly no kid, right?
No, it's true. I would say that if I do nothing else during my time here in New Haven, it will be that we understand this building as a museum. And I think that one of the things that I have wanted more than anything is for us to regain that, because I think that museums to me are about places where you can come to see art, but it is also where the art is seen by you. That interaction between viewer and object is incredibly important, and that happens in the space of the museum. And so it's the work of both the visitor and the resident.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that a big part of it is how do we bring people to art is by making them feel welcome. I think one of the main objectives for any museum that is either building, renovating, rethinking is how do they expand audiences? Not necessarily to have more people, but to have people who didn't grow up going to museums, who as a result feel a certain amount of intimidation and less curiosity. So it's the two things, right? And that is not, it's not that easy to do. I mean, when you walk around here, paintings of racehorses, like
Good
how
paintings of racehorses, though.
The
Really
be-
good
the
ones,
best in
yeah.
the world, right?
In this nation, yeah.
Yeah.
they're not for everyone. And
Why not,
still,
though? But why
no,
not?
no, I'm not arguing with you. It's just what you hear time and again. And I wonder about that as well. And I argue that art is transformative for everyone if you allow it to enter. But in order to feel compelled for that, certain things have to happen. And for the National Gallery in London, we did a lot of public outreach with a company called Kahn and Partners. And they went everywhere. And the resounding request for people is that they want to encounter a human being when they enter who is friendly and who opens the door. And I really was a little bit surprised, but then thinking about it, no, it's like, you know, there are long queues. You have to go through these gates that make sure that you don't have an AK-47 in your pocket. And the guards are sour because they have to stand outside. They have to wear a uniform. They get asked questions that they don't necessarily know how to answer. And so that is a bad setup.
That's a good question. So I think we probably all agree that art is for everyone, and museums, whatever they're named, should be accessible to everyone. But on those 4 bullet points that I mentioned in the definition of collect, preserve, interpret, and display, is perhaps the key to making the horse work for everybody, how you interpret it, what you say about it, how a visitor can connect to it. There's been a lot of talk recently, certainly about the Met in New York, about the work. I'll put this in the past tense, but I don't think it's totally yet in the past tense, the work they call primitive and
Yes.
the work they call art. And so even that is a Russian
or
interpretation.
Yeah.
or self-taught art that
Yeah.
has
Yes.
always startled me, because eventually every art is self-taught, right? I mean, you can have somebody teaching you how to do watercolors, but will you become a good watercolorist as a result? Or could you maybe try and you become a good watercolorist because you've just figured it out?
Kim,
And I
you're
think
sitting
it
there.
is.
I think he believes art can be taught, actually.
No, of course art can be taught, but I think that separation feels not
Oh,
right.
it's as ridiculous as the primitive.
It is. And it's even as we say it, it feels anachronistic, and yet we all live inside of it. And I think that's a hard point. You know, even in the chapters, I think, where we try to disrupt the boundaries, what does or doesn't get included in American art, for example, there is always the nod to the thing that we understand that we're coming from. So even when we talk about, say, an Asian American art, we're still talking about the fact that it's not included in American art, that it's a separate case. Can I ask you, Annabelle, if I'm curious about the sense of the community survey. Do you do that for all of the projects that you engage in? Is that a normal practice?
One way or the other it is. And I think it is increasingly so because we realize increasingly, I have always felt that in order to do a good project, you have to learn everything that there is to learn. And that means that you have to ask questions that are seemingly stupid. It includes a great deal of listening and interpreting what people say. Initially, you ask your client or you ask, I don't know, like the consultants or whoever that may be. But with public projects, if you can, you have to expand that circle and really understand that a building is successful is if people use it. And the people who use it are the visitors. They're also the people who build it, right? So architecture is an entirely human-based activity. And taking that into consideration and also understanding how changes, however subtle they are, can make such a tremendous difference. It's the thing that keeps the practice alive.
I do think in some ways that practice has changed, particularly since the 21st century started, where whether you call it surveys or community engagement or lots more listening or panel discussions or all the ways in which you can extract information from owners, from users, from communities, from your consultants, from your team, is architecture going forward, I think, in a positive and inclusive way, and that the old model of, the grand genius silhouetted against the setting sun with the cape flying in the breeze, who knows everything and gives you the building whether you want it or not, that he wants to make for you.
He.
I had to use some pronoun, is no longer the way to successfully make a building.
What shifted that?
I think lots of things over a long time. Maybe the failure of some genius architect buildings. And this is not to pick on that. I think it's a model that can be criticized, but it's not totally flawed. There have been great results over many centuries. So I really want to be clear about that. It's another baby not to throw out with the bathwater. But I think people feeling entitled to speak when their community or neighborhood or work or undertaking was being challenged or undermined by the actions of others. And that could be anything from campuses expanding to museum being plumbed to housing being taken away, whatever it might be. We're getting way beyond the museum, and I probably should reel this back in. But I think the change has occurred incrementally over a long period of time, and we're starting to see it most significantly now because enough has happened.
Yeah, I think that that's true. And specifically in museums, the people-centric focus has so much to do with wanting a different audience to feel comfortable, right? So it goes all the way to bringing somebody, making people curious. But then I think it is also interesting to think whether that necessarily means that space has to change. People always ask me, how do you make a good gallery, a good exhibition space? And you think, well, it's proportion, circulation, light, coherence. Fairly logical stuff, but then something else has to happen in that as well. And it's likely better if it isn't formulaic, right? So I come back to, I think about how do people experience the art and how do they circulate in space, and how do you stay away from something that is formulaic, that is static.
Do museum directors or the people who commission you to do these buildings say to you, I want not formulaic, not static, welcoming, or do they say, I don't want a series of enfilade rooms, or I don't want a grand hall? Are they defining the 21st century museum or museum edition in terms of no to this or yes to that?
Wow, that's a big question. I think take somebody like Michael Govan, who's working with Peter Zumthor in Los Angeles, and you may or may not have heard the two of them speak together. And it's a lot of grand statements that have to do with how you're meant to experience a work of art without having to have any context necessarily, because the work of art presents itself in the fabulous monumental space. I more often than not think people don't know so much about architecture or what makes architecture great. And more often than not, I think museum directors are art historians. And while they have experienced art spaces and have sort of a reference for where they felt the experience was good, it's also frequently divorced from that bigger experience that we're talking about, where visitors are concerned, if you know what I mean. So in my case, more often than not, I've dealt with museums that already exist. And that's a very tall order to live up to. Some architecture writer said that I was no John Russell Pope. And I thought about it for a little while, having spent a great deal of time looking in the mirror and thinking, am I John Russell Pope? I agreed with him.
Yeah.
I'm not. But the statement was meant a criticism, although the reasons for the criticism weren't entirely clear to me since the building hadn't been built yet. But yeah, there you go. Make art spaces next to John Russell Pope. It's pretty intimidating. The architecture of the Frick, and that's John Russell Pope was the second architect after Thomas Hastings, is amazing.
Yeah, spectacular.
It's spectacular. It's rigorous. It is innovative in ways, and it's very, I was going to say controlled because I couldn't think of a better word, but it is secure in a way. You know, it's like
It knows what it wants to do.
yeah, like there was no question. And so you have to have the confidence to work alongside something like that. And having spent a lot of time thinking about that, I realized that what we are doing today is different, and it answers to different requirements. It has to do, say it again, with people. We actually want to bring people into the building and we want them to feel welcome there.
So
And-
let me ask you a related question, because in the description that you've given so far, it's about moving through a space or where the art sits or how you feel welcome or where the guard stands, all of which I totally agree is completely important. So I'm going to put it back in the, so what does the museum director ask of you? What do they ask of you when they say, and it should look like this from the outside? What's this? Because I think when, when the facade of the Met was done, for instance, it was maybe already agreement. I don't know, there are historians here who definitely know better than I do. One assumes that museums look like the Met because that's what everybody thought a museum should look like. But I'm not sure anybody knows exactly what a museum should look like in the third decade of the 21st century. So does a museum director know what a museum should look like when you did San Diego? Or
No, nobody.
which is a big addition.
Nobody tells you, but when you develop an idea and you present it, you have to be able to say why. Or anyway, I think that one ought to be able to say why. And in the case of the Frick collection, this was obviously a very well watched project.
Right.
In a landmark district that had all kinds of setbacks and variances that were required. And I didn't know what the building was going to look like for a long time, but I knew relatively quickly what the sort of key circulation moves would be in order to make this our edition work. And truthfully, we're adding very little space because there isn't much available. But it was really all about connecting people and making the building accessible and allowing people to get to the second floor. But in so doing, we made all kinds of other things possible. And a little bit of it is maybe my nature or something, is that it didn't seem necessary to have to assert my presence, as it were, but rather say, I'm not going to try to look like buildings by John Russell Pope and Thomas Hastings, but materially picking up on the context, understanding certain proportions, made perfect sense. And so I'm pretty confident that that is what we are going to deliver, and that the experience inside enables the whole to be so much better.
But how about in a place, so I get that, and I also know how difficult a site that is, and it's surrounded by people for whom cost is no object in hiring expensive lawyers to stop things, and and it's the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. I mean, on and on and on and on. But when you get to a place like San Diego, where your edition is much bigger and essentially has a facade and identity of its own, the original question was, and does somebody tell you what they want it to look like? Do you tell them what it's going to look like? Do you work from the inside out?
Yeah. Yes, is the short answer. Again, very, very difficult site, multiple architectures that were present, that were, sort of important to acknowledge. And our site was to the south, where the museum had acquired property. And they had no clue how difficult it was going to be to utilize the site, because it was going down a relatively steep hill, and you have all kinds of restrictions working on the Pacific Ocean, but height restrictions that were prohibitive at times. And so it was a bit of a puzzle. And the thing that I was incredibly excited about is that it felt like they cracked the geometry. And so I don't know if you are the same, but I have to draw the same thing 150 times. And the 151st time, something happens and you just have sort of, oh, well, there it is. And so again, it is like nobody tells you what to do, but ultimately you have to be able to explain why you're doing something. And for me, it's always the same thing. It's about how do I circulate in a building that makes the path inevitable and the experience one that has a certain logic, but also intuition alongside of it. And I will say that the museum in San Diego for me is the most rewarding piece of architecture I've done, because
Yet,
it lives in your
in case there are
head
any future clients here, you have to say
yet. Because everything I cared for worked out. And I think that the existing buildings look better than ever. Our addition is distinct. It doesn't steal anyone's thunder, but it kind of creates a series of neighbors that are able to speak to each other. And it has such variety and such great daylight. And I'm waxing on poetic about my own work, forgive me. But what I am trying to say is these are spaces for art. And seeing the art hang in the building just is fantastic.
So let me use these are spaces for art as a segue, because you also design galleries. In a gallery,
people tell you what to do, yes.
And the work gets sold and they make money. So how is the process different? The process and the result, I should say. I know that's not within your category, but we're going there anyhow.
Well, the process is different in that in a commercial situation, speed is of the essence. Of course, speed is always of the essence, but somebody wants to build a gallery, they want to open in time for freeze, and that's it. And they don't want to spend too much money, and they want to be sure that the space is flexible for all kinds of different installations. Now, I work with a lot of clients who I've worked with for a very long time. Like if I use the example of Hauser Wirth and David Werner, they're very, very different from one another. And also the art that they show is very different. And you develop a vocabulary over time. And I cannot tell you why the spaces for David look different from the spaces for Ivan. I think it's because it's just what happens. You respond to that. And I know this doesn't sound so impressive, but I know what I have to do to make it function perfectly well. I know what proportions I'm looking for. So I can see my own work in both of those places, and I don't feel like one is better than the other, but it's responsive to the circumstance, and the circumstance is obviously a little bit the site, but oftentimes also the client, like how they want for people to interact with the art. Like Hauser Wirth is a gallery that wants to have people in the art right away, as much of it as possible. Whereas David is much more maybe academic. sort of more interested in what the composition of an exhibition is and what the rendering of daylight is and so on and so forth. But I think your point is a good one. It's like, these are clients who are totally hands-on and they tell you what to do, and you have to kind of fight like hell to say, no, 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 we're not doing that. But yeah.
Are you rejoining? Are you feeling okay?
Just in time for questions.
Oh,
You know, I wondered, Annabelle, one of the things that I think many people look to your practice and say is that you are in large part responsible for the quality of commercial galleries shifting to look more like museums. I don't know if you think that's a positive or a negative. That to me has always seemed like a positive.
I would think so.
Do you accept that? And did either Hauser or Werner say to you, there is something that we want here, and it becomes the museum?
Well, I think that David Werner is one of the more articulate people I've ever worked with. And he was very, very conscious when we did the building on 20th Street that he wanted the best quality exhibition he could produce. Did he say it should be museum-like? No, not especially, but in some ways, I think he felt that it should be better than what a museum could do, because he's so engaged in that, so relentless and intense. So I would like to take that as a compliment, that what you just said, but I think it's a little bit the dialogue that produces that kind of quality and the insistence on that. And the first person I worked with who I think I maybe learned more from than anybody was Michael Verna. I did a gallery for him a very, very long time ago. And he told me nothing. He hired me over the telephone and said, I'll be in New York in 6 weeks, and then we can look at the drawings together. And I had never done a gallery before. And so there I was in my shirt, drawing by hand and realizing that I was designing things, even though he had said that he hated design. And I was like a little bit of a head scratcher, because it's like, how's the ceiling going to meet and how's this going to meet? So I think what happened then was that I felt incredibly challenged by this person who just wasn't going to tell me what they wanted. And so you develop this vocabulary. And the truth is, it's a huge amount of work, because there is not a single thing that you can left unattended. So you have to know how thick every bloody thing is, and how wide, and how the corners meet, where the doors are, and what have you. So Michael Werner arrived 6 weeks later. He didn't necessarily speak very much, but he looked at the drawings and wrinkled his forehead and then pulled out this little crumpled piece of paper and placed it next to an elevation of a door. And it was like a stupid looking door that had sort of like lots of mullions. And he looked at the door that I had done, that, if I say so myself, was a very nice door. And he said, yeah, yours is better. And so I'm not saying anything other than that you have to sort of develop a vocabulary, a narrative, and work through it. And in those days, I was the only one in the office. And so then that's what you do, right? You know everything. And that affords you the next thing because you know where you were last time around. And I think that never changes. And so some people like that. But there are people who say, oh, these galleries all look the same. They're just white boxes. And
Shows I can't see details.
exactly.
I have a feeling that there are lots of questions in the audience for both of you. And we've also got another population that's at home, apparently more than 250 of them, who may
Really?
also have questions.
Where are the cameras?
If we're going to be sending microphones down on either side. And Jane, you've got, have you already got a question queued up? Please take it away.
Just raise your hand when you have a question, and then please wait to get to you for that. And then so we have a question from Sean Stahl, and it is: are there any particular pieces of art that strongly influence your design of the space?
I went to Frick Madison this weekend and thought about how old master paintings look in the Breuer building. The layout of those rooms was very, very specifically focused on what we were going to show where, and we worked very closely with the curators and how paintings would speak to one another. And that produced, I think, a very spectacular layout. And then in my head, I thought, if we removed the art, painted the walls a different color, maybe white, and did a Bridget Wiley installation, that would look damn good. And so the answer is it's both. It's actually immensely helpful to be specific and to know where you're going to hang what and sort of see the space evolve that way. But I also like to think that when you do something like that and it works very well, it works in different ways for other things. And that's actually something that makes me think about what you said with the art schools, is that you make spaces for one resident who will, I don't know, paint or do something, and then it has to change tack. So there's the inherent flexibility, right?
Yeah, I guess it goes back to not neutral would be the wrong word. The studios in schools that we have done, both in art schools and actually for dance or music or whatever, for all the various kind of art schools that we've done over the years, don't go back to neutral. They go back to, you're welcome to beat me up now. And when somebody's done, they leave, and there's, I don't know if the reset button is the custodial crew or the light switch. You know, it doesn't take much to have it reset. Maybe it's paint,
But let me ask you this. Do you think the studio spaces inspire the artists?
I hope the ones that we do, I would never use the word inspire. I think that is way too pretentious a position for the architect to take. I hope that each space that we do in any kind of art school allows the person to create and discover their own best work with the help of the people who are teaching them. And so,
But you
inspiration's
offer
probably the
something
wrong
of
word.
yourself in
Um,
making those spaces. And I understand why you would say that you think that that's pretentious. But I remember that I was very, very lucky to be at the American Academy in Rome. And you get a studio when you're there. And I had the use of Philip Guston's studio. It's a Guston room. Of course, it wasn't Philip Guston who made that studio, but boy, was that room inspiring. And it didn't have a great view. It had a fabulous skylight. It was totally beaten up.
Jeff was good.
It was great. It was really great. And I didn't do anything in there. I just made like tiny little drawings. And
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question because you're really talking about a kind of legacy and a lineage and knowing the presence of the people who were there before you. And I think when we're designing schools, the idea of the space is to get out of the way of the making. So they don't, I'd like it next day, but I think the walls that we found are very beautiful. And the ones that we made are also very beautiful. But they're meant to be found, not aggressive.
I don't think they need to be aggressive to be present.
Well, they're definitely very present.
All right, we got her.
They're definitely very present.
And so we've got a question right here. Or
Yeah, I was just kind of interested. At the beginning, we talked a lot about people that are usually not served by museums and the way that kind of should influence maybe the design of them. But then we quickly switched to do gallery. People are running the galleries, do they decide what happens? And we didn't ever get back to maybe how does your vocabulary address the people who should be coming and being inspired by things they typically wouldn't be inspired by. I was wondering if we could talk about that.
Well, there's so many models, right? In architecture, in the history of architecture, Leon Creer, who walked around and did like these surveys, people to shape neighborhoods, and it's not Leon Creer, it's I'm amongst architects here, it's embarrassing. French architect. So, point being, I feel one has to navigate the path of trying to understand, learn, hear, process, and try and give something back that's responsive to that. And at the same time, also feel that there is, you're answering to something that you have in your own head as an idea that stands alone, perhaps. So, in other words, the pressures are tremendous because there's a client on one end of the spectrum and a reality that you encounter as an architect in terms of what the budget of a project may be, its life cycle, etc. And
I think your answer is interesting, but I actually have a question for the gentleman who asked the question, and it goes back. And I'm sorry we didn't spend longer on that subject because it is indeed also a very interesting subject for me. And way early on, there was this comment about, the threshold trigger, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about the Met, and I keep referring to the Met because it's sort of a stand-in of the museum, right? The steps, the columns, the cranky guard, the pocketbook search, the giant flowers, and then you get to a painting of a horse. So which one of those moments is the one that discourages the unincluded audience from wanting to be there? I wish I knew the answer. I think it might be cumulative, actually. But
yeah, I mean, I would probably argue that it's a great combination of things. All right. Not really sure what your question was. Yeah, I guess it would just be like, I would want to know how has it impacted the work, since it was such a point you made, especially bringing up the racehorse. Like, I would argue that isn't necessarily a subject.
No, I think it's not how it has influenced the work, how it continuously influences the work, because the more you realize that this hesitation exists, the more you try and find answers, and you then understand that it's not all the built environment, but so many things that surround it. Like in London, the conversation about entering the Sainsbury wing is super interesting because it's a fairly tight, low space right now. And it's meant to be the main entrance, and 6 million people go there per year, or will be going there once they go again. And what I was asked to do is provide a world-class welcome.
Sounds like an airline.
What does that look like?
Yeah, we're trying to figure out what that looks like. But I think the real idea is that people who hang out on Trafalgar Square, but yet have never set foot into the National Gallery, feel compelled to do so. And they don't feel like somebody looks at them and says, "What are you doing here?" Some part of that is that you can go in and sit and maybe not go to the galleries. But maybe something makes you curious. But if you go in and you're not going to the galleries, that's okay too. So is that an answer? No, it's not an answer. It's speculating, and it's in the first place establishing that that is what you want. There's always somebody who says, "We want a very big bookshop." And you're like, "No, we don't want a bookshop. We don't want the first thing for people to have to spend money." But anyway, it's, so only to say that it's ongoing conversation. It's in having an experience, and sort of maybe you learn something from that experience, and you hear what somebody else says, and that goes like, "Oh yeah, right, friendly light is better than 4,000 Kelvin refrigerator colored light." So
I'm thinking of this moment. It was during COVID in New York when the museums had reopened, but there were no tourists. And I went to the architecture of Black architects exhibition at the Modern, and I'm embarrassed I'm forgetting the actual name of that exhibition, but it was a wonderful exhibition. The museum was packed. And I asked Martino obscurely, "Wow, who are all these people? New York is empty." And he said, "Well, they're all New Yorkers." And I said, "That's so fantastic." And he said, "Yeah, and the thing we're trying to figure out is how to get them to keep coming to the museum when the tourists come back."
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if some of your question isn't who you find yourself with when you're there, such that you feel comfortable.
I think that is
Very
such a
much so.
good point. Yeah.
Anyway, it's a fabulous show, and I went twice, and it was absolutely packed both times.
I think we have a question here.
Thank you. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the role of history in both of your work. I know maybe this is both a question of like, how do you decide what to preserve or what to bring forward, both an aesthetic question, but also a question of values. And I think I also thought of it when you were talking about the definition of a museum. I think sometimes a museum maybe calls to mind more of like something more frozen in time, whereas maybe a studio sometimes will call to mind like a living, breathing production of art. And I think that's not always necessarily true. That's maybe too silent. So I'm curious to hear about the role of history in your work and how you approach that.
You go first.
Yeah. All right. I would say it's like many of these questions and points, it's a complicated multi-part answer, because there is the sort of capital H version of history, like, is it John Russell Pope? Is it Shreve, Lamb and Harmon? Who made the thing and how respected are they? And even to the extent of how much is the building, its rooms, its exterior, either protected by law or the decisions you make supported by government funds that require you to do something in a certain way. So that's one version of history. And then there is, I think, the history of the community, the neighborhood, the institution, like what is the role of the building when you walk down the street? Do people know it? Do they remember it? Do they think fondly of it? Or do they hate it? Does it have good recollections or bad recollections? And then for me anyhow, there's the wonderful, all of those parts are wonderful. Well, no, the state historic organizations are usually terrible, but there's the zoom way in moment when, as the building is being transformed and dissembled, you discover things. And sometimes you discover artifacts and in the making of buildings that are truly beautiful, you know, an old column capital or a riveted together beam or floorboards that have been covered up for years, but are really spectacular. And you want to save those and kind of leave them untouched. Don't fix them up too much. And other times what you find really is not so good and it deserves no respect, and your hand can be much more present. But I think it's, I don't know if it's a thing.
No, I quite agree. I think this, especially what you said at the end, reminds me of sort of discovering that historical architects were people too. And so you think reverentially about the architecture of so-and-so, and then you discover that they sort of cut a corner somewhere, and you're like, what? So in historical buildings, I think that what happens is that you, maybe this is a little bit generalist, but I sort of let things fall in three categories. Like, you restore something outright, you understand what the substance is and how you go about it, what it means materially, what the best treatment is. Then there are places where you propose modifications for particular reasons, infrastructural or whatever the case may be. And you think you can proceed with the logic of the original building and credibly say, I don't know, there would have been a doorway here or something like that. And then there's the third category where you have to sort of be completely distinct of the old building because that's the only way to actually preserve the whole. Like at the Neue Gallery, we put in a new elevator because we had to. There was only one place in the building that it could be, and it wasn't going to look like it had always been there. So the strategy was to say, okay, this, you articulate it. You say, that represents a change. But you always have to sort of go through the entire narrative to understand the building, to know where somebody came from. And I think what you were just saying about the discovery of things is really important, because there's always so much more than what you can see right away.
I think part of that is there are those things about which one is reverent as an architect, and there are those things about which there is the enormous joy and thrill of total irreverence. And the circuit along them, I think, is how you tackle, engage, embrace, collaborate with an existing building with a dead architect, you know?
I think we'll take our last question here. Is that what you're signaling me to, Jane? Thank you.
You mentioned how a lot of times for you, the circulation motivates the design. And you also mentioned that there were a lot of cases where a client asks you for something and then you try to imagine how that looks like, what that looks like. And I wanted to press on where do these two meet, and how do you resolve that?
Well, I take what people ask for quite seriously. I actually think that clients often, they usually know more than you do to begin with. And you have to get yourself to the place where you know more than they. But in order to get there, you have to actually take what they ask for at face value and sort of follow through with that. And for me, circulation represents maybe the narrative or the skeleton of the narrative. And it provides me with a kind of logic that I can follow, because it allows me in my mind's eye to begin to think how you would access a space and how you would experience it. And the more I can do that, the more I can then return and answer what somebody has asked me to do. Does that make sense? So that's why, yeah, circulation is like your own spine, or the gives you the pulse.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Annabelle, Deborah, I'm overwhelmed that you all came tonight. You came all the way here.
Well,
really
I
appreciate it.
came first and foremost because Cece gave me a full tour
Yes.
of the building, and that was like so wonderful. I mean, you are in a building that it just must make you happy to come here every day.
It does. Very much
Yeah,
so.
such a masterpiece, and I took lots of pictures.
Deborah, thank you for coming down the street. We appreciate it very much.
You know, the way New Haven has its light signals and crosswalks
I know,
just
it was
make me
tough.
nuts.
It
I
was
had to do two
that-
streets.
yeah.
Yeah, or that diagonal thing. It's so confusing.
And thank you all for joining us. I hope that you will come back for the next in the series, which will resume in the fall. Have a good evening. Thank you.